All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Target Point, brought to you by On Target Institute. And you'll see on the screen there, it's your host, Vince D'Acchioli, and I've got a dear friend of mine. His name is Jim Pierce. And Jim is the founder of The Wild Branch. And his email is on the screen. It's really simple, the Wild Branch Ministries at gmail.com. And I'm going to let Jim explain a little bit more about the Wild Branch. I met Jim a number of years ago, and I was just fascinated by his knowledge of the Old Testament, especially, and the Jewish roots. And he's just a fascinating guy to talk to, and I'm sure you're going to really enjoy my visit with him. So, Jim, why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit about your story before we get into the ministry that God has you in right now.
Sure. Yeah, I was I was born and raised in Southern California, actually Orange County, and I got saved in 1976 at a Jimmy Swaggart crusade. I was raised in a Lutheran church, and I've kind of come full circle in all the different denominational groups, starting with the Lutherans, and then Jimmy Swaggart at the time was Assembly of God, and we went to an AOG church for a while and was exposed to the gifts of the Holy Spirit and how those operate in different denominations. Eventually, at a charismatic church in Anaheim, went to Melodyland Christian Center with Ralph Wilkerson, and in fact, Benny Hinn had spent some time there as well. And then I went to high school there, Christian high school, and eventually at Anaheim Vineyard for a while, Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa for a while. And so that's sort of my spiritual background. Ended up actually at a Foursquare church in Ventura, which of course Jack Hayford's Foursquare, and Chuck Smith was raised Foursquare in his younger years. And so kind of exposed a lot of the charismatic and Pentecostal movements historically, and going back to the Reformation with, of course, the Lutheran Church. And then moved to Colorado in 1990. I was on staff with a vineyard there, Vineyard of Grand Junction. I was a children's pastor. We had about 300 kids that I managed that ministry and had a wonderful time. I loved doing it. And then eventually moved to Colorado Springs in 97. Actually went to Steve Holt's church at the time was Mountain Springs Vineyard. And that's how I met Steve many years ago now. And then ended up at a Calvary Chapel here in Colorado Springs as an associate pastor. And so that was kind of sort of some of my spiritual journey. I was ordained at the Vineyard and also ordained at Calvary Chapel. Wow. And now currently we're going to a church called the Jesus Church here in Colorado Springs.
Wow. And, well, we have some common ancestry, if you will. Yeah. I mean, because our roots were all in Southern California, and all those places you mentioned, we've been to them. I mean, yeah. I remember when Dennis Easter was out at Ventura Foursquare there for a while.
Yeah,
of course,
I went to church.
Yeah, we grew up in Jack Hayford's ministry back in the 80s, and our background is somewhat similar. My wife was Lutheran. I was Catholic, so we came from the Catholic and the Lutheran church. I came directly from the Catholic church to Hayford, man. I mean, that's my theological journey. I mean, you're talking about an earthquake, buddy. I mean, it was like whoa. For those of you watching or listening that have heard my story, you know a little bit about that. It was kind of a funny experience, but it wasn't so funny at the time. I crashed and burned and needed a savior bad, and was exposed to Hayford's ministry in his prime. You and I have had some exposure to some real saints in our background that have helped to disciple us. And I know that you feel the same way I do. We're so grateful for that, Jim. But tell us a little bit about how the Lord brought you to this place. Now, you're a tent maker. You have your own business, but your passion obviously is extending God's kingdom, and you have a passion for that. And how did God bring you to the Wild Branch? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I always loved the Old Testament. I always was fascinated with the Torah. Maybe more so than my contemporaries. So I've just always had a passion for those things. And then it was probably about 5 years ago. I was thumbing through YouTube videos and came across a video of someone singing what's known as the Shema prayer. And Shema means to hear or listen intently, and it's Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. So it means, hear, O Israel, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And as I listened to it at the time, I didn't even know what it meant, but I felt the presence of God, the Holy Spirit, just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I wept uncontrollably for an hour as I listened to this over and over and over. And I said, man, there's something on this. I got to find out what this is. And then, of course, the first thing my mind came to was Jesus, when the Pharisees and the teachers of the law came to him and said, sum up the law and the prophets. The first thing he said was, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And then Jesus also then added, and love your neighbor as yourself. He was quoting, of course, Exodus and Leviticus.
Mhm.
Every Jewish mom for the past 3,500 years, the first thing they teach their 3 or 5-year-old boy or girl is the Shema prayer. Hear, O Israel, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And so Jesus said that to sum up all of the Torah with these teachers of the law, because he knew every Jew within the sound of his voice knew that prayer and said it twice a day, in the morning and at sunset. And so to me, that started a journey for me. I had to understand, why is this so important, and what am I missing that I wasn't exposed to in the evangelical circles that I've been involved in for most of my adult life. And it was about 4 months after that, a young woman and her husband came to our church at Calvary Chapel, True North. Her name was Ramon. She was a born and raised Israeli Jew. Met Matt at college here in the United States, and they got married. And she went forward to receive Jesus one Sunday. And I started digging as fast as I could through all the material I could find about what people now call the Hebrew roots of our faith. And so I was learning a lot and learning a lot of fascinating information. And so Ramon went forward to receive Jesus at our church, and she accepted Yeshua as HaMoshiach, which is Hebrew for Jesus as her Messiah. And so she came to me in her Hebrew accent. She says, Jim, was someone taking my picture as I went forward to pray? And I was like, Ramon, why would you ask me that? And she goes, well, as soon as I prayed and asked Yeshua to forgive me of my sins and to be my Messiah, my Moshiach as a Jew, I saw this huge flash of light. And
Wow.
I was blown away. I was like, Ramon, that happens to Jewish people all the time.
Oh, wow.
She didn't get the joke. I had to explain it later. Because you didn't know the New Testament, the Brit
Oh my
Hadashah.
gosh.
And so, which of course, that's what happened to the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus. God
Yeah.
struck him down with a flash of light. And many, many Jewish people in Israel today are coming to salvation in Messiah. They're not converting to anything. They're not leaving Judaism in the sense of they're converting to Lutheran or Pentecostal or anything else. They're accepting the Messiah and then beginning a discovery of what that means in today's world, according to the New Testament and the Old Testament. So I just had a passion. There's many believers who are interested in these things, and there's many bad teaching out there. And so just to kind of understand, what does the Bible actually say, and how do we embrace these things as I'm not Jewish by heritage that I know of anyway, but I am in the sense that Jesus adopted me as his very own.
Yes, right.
And he was a Jew.
You're grafted in. Explain where the name, the wild branch. I mean, it seems pretty intuitive, but for the person who doesn't understand, explain that concept.
Sure. So in Ephesians and Galatians, I think in Romans, the Apostle Paul talks about the Gentiles being grafted in to the vine of Israel, being grafted into the olive tree. And so I felt, when I was on staff with True North, I was kind of frustrated. I felt this passion. I felt like I got born again when I started discovering this whole aspect of our faith that I didn't even know existed after being a believer for 45 years. And as I dug into it, I was like, Lord, I feel like I'm a vineyard pastor, if you know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at a Calvary Chapel, which is not quite as gifts of the Spirit oriented, at least in today's world, as it was back in the day. And yet I have this deep passion for the roots of our faith, in the true Jewish roots, because there's a difference. And I was like, Lord, you made me this strange, I was mad. I was like, God, you made me this strange hybrid. What am I doing? I'm just this weird hybrid of a vineyard guy at a Calvary Chapel and this Hebrew roots. And I felt the Lord said very profoundly to me, he said, I didn't make you a hybrid. I made you a new breed that I want to restore what was lost. to the church 1800 years ago during the Nicene Creed, when Constantine began to adopt Catholic, at the time, Roman pagan traditions to the church. And I felt like Lord said, I want to restore what was lost. I want the body to be one again, Jew and Gentile together. The grafted vine, the Gentiles being grafted into the root of Israel.
The wild branch.
And that's us, the wild branch.
Yes. And so tell our listening audience and our viewers, what is your passion? What is really the vision, the purpose, the takeaway of the Wild Branch Ministries? What do you hope to be able to bring to people that will satisfy the calling you believe God has put upon you?
So I think the main portion is to restore things that were lost, to understand that though Jesus understands when we call him Jesus, but his mama and the disciples called him Yeshua. And what does that mean? And how do we restore those things? There's many false teachings that say we have to follow the Torah in a literal sense, and whether we're Gentile or Jewish. And there are many rabbis who have who want to bring us into a Judaizer situation. Not all rabbis, but to just begin to explain and understand the historical context, and then to restore our understanding of who we are in our faith, and that the Messiah we worship is a Jew. And there's traditions and things that we miss because we don't know enough Hebrew or Jewish history to understand and relate to. So to begin to restore some of that.
Well, that brings me to an interesting observation, I guess, that I have. And a lot of people who are profess to be Christian, and some who are actually pretty mature in their belief, struggle trying to marry the Old Testament with the New Testament, because it almost seems like they are two completely different gods. And if you don't know any better, it can be a real challenge. And what will you say to people to help them understand that bridge? Because I think that you're obviously going to come across that with your ministry. There's a lot of misconceptions in Christianity today, and especially evangelical circles, about the place of the Old Testament and even some of the beliefs. There's a lot of people that do translate it, some of the things that are said in the Old Testament with a Western mindset that is not the way it was originally intended when it was written. So what are the few misconceptions that you could maybe clear up and help people understand this beautiful scarlet thread that really does exist, but oftentimes many Christians can't perceive?
Right. Yeah. Of course, the classical phrase, I think the first time I heard it was Jack Hayford, Pastor Jack, who's one of my spiritual heroes. And he said, what's concealed in the Old Testament is revealed in the New Testament. So you miss what's revealed if you don't know what was concealed. So
that's good.
Yeah. And I believe we can study the Old Testament and see Jesus on every page. But we have to understand context and culture, sound biblical exegesis. The Old Testament has been fulfilled, but is not done away with in the sense we don't need it. We don't even understand the New Testament unless we know what the Old Testament taught. And many things are lost because we just throw it out with well, that's been fulfilled, so we don't need it anymore. And so the interesting thing, like first, the word Torah in Hebrew, we translate it law. But what it actually is Torah. The root word of Torah is Yara. And Yara is the image of an archer aiming at a target. And that's Yara. And so if we remember that, and then we say Torah, it's not so much law as it is rules for guidance and governance. We're aiming for the bullseye. We might even miss the target entirely, but we're trying to hit it. And so that brings a whole different understanding of what Torah means to us in modern day, as modern day believers.
Kind of being on target.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
I might use that actually. That sounds like a good thing to use. But that's one example of how people, if they don't study some of the meanings of some of these words, they miss so much richness. Do you have a resource or some advice for people who are desperate for wanting to bridge that difference between the Old and the New Testament, study more to see the light that is being shined on Yeshua, what would you advise them? How would they start?
Yeah. So there's several resources that I recommend. One of my favorite resources when I first started this is a gentleman who has a website called Hebrew, the number 4 Christians. And he
Oh,
explains very, very soundly the difference between rabbinical traditions and actual biblical teaching, because they are very different. The word rabbi is not in the Old Testament. God's original plan for disseminating his word was through the Levitical priesthood, not through the rabbinical traditions. And there's reasons historically that happened. And of course, I have my YouTube channel that we're developing where we'll be doing teachings on some of the basic elements and then taking people to more advanced levels. This coming Friday night, I'm starting a Bible study at my house. We're going to start, it's evening of the Sabbath, Erev Shabbat, the biblical calendar. The new day starts at sunset. And we're going to go over initially the 7 feasts of God. And most Christians couldn't even tell you what they are. And the significance that the prophecies of the Messiah, the first coming and the second coming, are in those 7 feasts, starting with, of course, Passover, which is coming up here in April. And then we are going to celebrate, we're going to offer for people to join us for Passover. We're going to use the church facility where we're meeting at and set up a big Passover Seder to talk about the fulfillment of the Messiah in the Passover. It's literally, Passover is the oldest religious celebration on the history of the planet.
wow.
No other celebration has been celebrated for 3,500 years. God established the Passover as an annual celebration. And it's literally an object lesson of what Jesus, the Messiah, came to do as our Passover lamb. And all the feasts of Israel or the feast of God are that same thing.
Yeah.
So there's some great resources. There's some bad ones.
Well,
but they can
mention that resource one more time for our viewers so they can
for
write that
research
down.
Hebrew for Christians.
Hebrew, the number 4.
The Hebrew, the number 4 Christians.org, I believe.
Okay.
And that resource is just absolutely resplendent with some great, solid biblical teachings.
Yes, and I also recommend, I've been doing it for probably 40 years. I have a habit every year. I read a lot of extra biblical stuff too, but I read through the Word every year, the entire Bible.
Yes.
And the pattern I use brings in the Old Testament and the New Testament with Proverbs and Psalms and and all of that. But I know there are resources out there that really do help point people from the Old Testament to the New and a lot of the prophetic things. I mean, actually, the prophecies in the Old Testament that were filled in the New, scientifically, it's impossible for Jesus not to be the one that was foretold. It really is. It's just amazing. But you have to study it. You have to look for it. Right. So if someone wanted to connect with you on your YouTube or Facebook pages, how would they do that? How would they look you up?
Sure. So Facebook, you can look up me by my name, Jim Pierce, and ask for a friend request. Or we also have our Wild Branch Ministry Facebook page. You can look it up by the Wild Branch Ministry, or send me an email to the email address wildbranchministries plural @gmail.com. And so we're in the process of developing more and more teachings, but yeah. So I've studied. I have 2 friends in town that are Orthodox rabbis. They don't believe in Jesus, and I've studied with them many times to begin to understand their perspective of what the scriptures teach. And I'm also friends with Messianic rabbis. 3 Messianic rabbis here in town are very close friends of mine. One of them is Rabbi Bill Malone. He's from South Carolina. Wow. And he's an amazing guy. So,
yep, that's awesome. I have Cindy's brother. His name is Ted. He really has gone out of his way for years and years and years to study the Old Testament, and he actually sat under some really, really incredible Jewish teachers and rabbis, some of which did not believe in Jesus, but the richness that he got from those people and how they helped him understand that how we typically translate some of the verses in the Old Testament with our Western mind is very, very different than the way it was intended back then. So it's fascinating stuff. And it really is important that we see the Bible in its in the wholeness and the totality of everything that it's trying to communicate. And when you begin to do that, the evidence is overwhelming
Right.
for Jesus and for where we should be looking today. So
Right.
I really want to encourage you, if you've never done that, or if you're doubting if this Jesus is real,
Yeah.
start looking at the Old Testament and discover the story, the
Mhm.
whole story from the beginning, from creation to where we are today. And you'll see a tapestry that is so incredible and so beautiful. It's undeniable.
Right.
It just
Amen.
is undeniable.
And
Well, Jim, thank you so much. This has been very, very informative. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and to do this with us. If any last minute thoughts or ideas that you might want to share with our viewers, or
sure.
advice that you can give them before we sign off.
Yeah, yeah. Just one thing that came to mind as we're talking about, even in the Old Testament, God first gave his holy name, which is Yod He Vav He. We call it the Tetragrammaton. In the letters of God's holy name is a message, because Hebrew is a unique language and it's pictographic. It's a three-dimensional language. We have the letter. It actually represents a number. Each letter represents a number, and each letter represents a picture. And so in God's holy name, Yod in Hebrew, Yad is hand. And in modern Hebrew, it looks like an apostrophe. In biblical Hebrew that Moses or King David would have understood, it looks like a stick figure of someone's right hand. And that's the first letter of God's name, hand.
Wow.
Hey in modern Hebrew looks like a letter H. It's broken to us. In Hebrew that Moses or David would understand, it literally looks like a stick figure of a guy with his hands in the air. And that means the same thing in Hebrew as it does in English. It means behold. We say, hey, we want to look, behold.
Wow.
Vav looks like a tent peg in modern Hebrew and in ancient biblical Hebrew. And then hey. And if you turn those letters into a word, their grammar is reverse of ours. So it's behold the hand, behold the nail, is God's holy
Wow.
name that he gave to Moses 3,500 years ago.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, it
Wow.
just
I
sends
did
chills
not
up
know
my
that.
spine.
That is fascinating, man. That is really, really incredible. You're pretty smart for a young guy, Anyway, thank you again. And those of you who are watching and taking this in, please continue to tune in. We're going to try to broadcast every Monday and Friday at 10. Sometimes it'll just be me, and but other times we're going to be broadcasting these things live. I'm thinking I've got so many people on my list to interview. I'm thinking about maybe expanding that and maybe doing it maybe 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10. But if you're watching, please leave a comment. Let us know that these messages are meaningful, that you're learning from them and growing, because that's the desire of our heart. We're living in very, very difficult times right now, and we really need to be deeply rooted in the things of the Lord, if we're going to be used by him to be the men and women that he intended. So I want to encourage you to do that. And until next broadcast, hey, everybody, don't forget about it.